The gymnasium at the Los Angeles Olympic Auditorium held 412 people that afternoon in March of 1974. Not a seat was empty. The folding chairs had been arranged in a horseshoe around the demonstration floor, a polished hardwood surface 40 feet across. And the men who filled those chairs were not spectators in any ordinary sense. They were tournament directors, regional champions, magazine editors, and the men who had built the American karate circuit from nothing into something that filled arenas. If you could earn the respect of the people in that room, you had earned something that did not wash off. The three men at the center table had earned it several times over. The first was 29 years old and had won the Professional Karate Association's middleweight title twice before his 30th birthday. He stood 6 feet 1 inch, weighed 187 pounds in competition trim, and had a left round kick that the magazines called the fastest in the Western Circuit. He had been undefeated in sanctioned competition for 14 consecutive months. His name appeared on the cover of 3 national publications that year. He was not a man who doubted what he saw. The second was 27, a full contact champion who had defeated 11 opponents by technical knockout in the previous 18 months. He had trained in Okinawa for 2 years under a master who had refused to take American students for a decade before him. He moved like someone who had learned to waste nothing, not an ounce of weight, not a fraction of a second. He was the kind of man other fighters watched when they thought no one was looking. The third was the eldest of the 3 at 31. A tournament organizer and competitor who held black belts in 3 disciplines, and had developed a system of footwork that was being studied and replicated in dojos across California, Nevada, and Arizona. He was the one who had made the comment. He had not whispered it. What he said, in a voice the first 3 rows heard clearly, was this: "If this is the best they could find, we are going to be here a very short time." The man he was speaking about had entered the gymnasium 12 minutes earlier through a side door. He was wearing a dark green canvas jacket over a white pullover, dark trousers, and a pair of plain leather shoes with no particular distinction. He carried nothing. He had spoken to no one. He had taken a folding chair against the far wall, not the chairs reserved for demonstrators near the floor, and he had sat with the jacket still on and both hands resting on his knees, and he had looked at nothing in particular. He was 33 years old. He weighed 172 pounds. He had trained since the age of 18 in Korea, in Okinawa, in the basements of California, and in a rented storefront in Torrance where the ceiling leaked when it rained. He had won the Professional Karate Association's middleweight title 6 times. He had not lost a major competition in 6 years. His name was Charles Ray Norris, and he would not announce himself. In the next 4 minutes on that demonstration floor, 3 world champions would stop laughing. 2 of them would not speak publicly about what they saw for more than a decade. The third would write 4 sentences about it in a memoir published in 1991, and even then, he would not claim to have fully understood what had happened. Nobody in that gymnasium who was laughing at 14 minutes past 2 in the afternoon was laughing at 17 minutes past 2. That is a difference of 180 seconds, and what fills those seconds is the subject of what follows. Stay until the end of this story if you want to know the sentence he said to the third man as he helped him up from the floor. Because that sentence was not reported anywhere, not in any magazine and not in any documentary, until the man who received it chose to repeat it 37 years later. The karate demonstration circuit in 1974 was not a casual enterprise. The men who organized and performed at these events had spent years, in some cases decades, refining what they brought to a gymnasium floor. The demonstrations were not exhibitions of forms or patterns. They were controlled tests of principle, opportunities to show technique in conditions that approximated real pressure, with resistance and timing and consequence. The men who attended as judges and observers were not generous with their approval. They had seen too much mediocrity dressed in ceremony to be easily impressed. The 3 champions at the center table had agreed to attend the Los Angeles event because the organizer had promised them something different. He had promised them a demonstration of control and distance management that had not been publicly shown on the circuit before. He had not told them who would be demonstrating. He had said only that the man had a record and a particular way of working that was worth 3 hours of a Saturday afternoon. The three men had traveled from separate cities, the first from San Diego, the second from Phoenix, the third from Portland. They had arrived that morning, eaten together at a restaurant on Figueroa Street, and agreed, without quite saying it, that they expected very little. The circuit was full of men with records and particular ways of working. Most of them were impressive at distance and considerably less impressive up close. The circuit had also developed a habit of over-promising and under-delivering when it came to the genuinely rare practitioners. The genuinely rare ones did not usually agree to demonstrations. They had nothing to prove and nowhere to prove it. So when the third champion made his comment at 14 minutes past 2, the other two had not disagreed. One had set his coffee cup down with a deliberate sound and nodded. The other had looked at the man in the green jacket against the far wall and looked away again without changing his expression. They were men who had achieved a great deal and who had learned to recognize the limits of what they were looking at, and what they were looking at appeared to have limits. They were about to discover what it feels like to be exactly and comprehensively wrong. The gymnasium had a particular quality to its silence in the moments before a demonstration began. The folding chairs creaked. Someone near the back coughed and then was quiet. The overhead lights, fluorescent and flat, gave everything an even exposure that removed shadow, and with it the comfortable ambiguity of shadow. There was nowhere to hide what you were doing in that light. The floor showed every mark, the walls held every sound. The organizer stood at the edge of the demonstration area at 10 minutes past 2 and said 6 sentences to the room. He said that the man demonstrating had requested an informal format. He said there would be 3 phases. He said the first would involve footwork and distance principles. He said the second would involve controlled technique against a resistant partner. He said the third would be open, meaning the 3 champions were invited to approach the demonstration floor and engage at whatever level of resistance they felt was appropriate. He said no one was required to participate in the third phase. He did not say the man's name. The man in the green jacket stood up when the organizer finished speaking. He walked to the edge of the demonstration floor and stopped there for a moment. He reached up and removed the jacket. He folded it once along the seam, deliberately, without rushing, and set it on the nearest chair. He stepped out of his leather shoes and placed them beside the jacket, parallel to each other, toes toward the wall. He straightened and looked at the floor and then at the room, not at any particular section of it, just at the room as a whole, the way a man looks at a body of water before he enters it. The third champion said something quiet to the man beside him. The man beside him did not respond. The 217 words that will follow describe 4 minutes. That is approximately 54 words per minute, and it is still not enough. What happened in those 4 minutes has the quality of things that compress badly. They were 4 minutes of such particular density that the men who were present spent the following years trying to unpack them, and most of them concluded that they were not finished unpacking. A fight is not 2 men doing things to each other. A fight at its most refined is a conversation about space. It is a negotiation conducted entirely through position and angle and timing, and the man who controls the terms of the negotiation controls everything that follows. The man who appears to be in danger is often the man setting the terms. The man who appears to be pressing his advantage is often the man who has already lost the argument and does not know it. Understanding this requires watching a great deal of fighting. Accepting it requires watching one particular man on one particular afternoon. He did not announce what he was about to do, he simply began. The first phase lasted 80 seconds. He worked with the organizer's assistant, a young man of 22, who was himself a regional brown belt finalist, and who had been briefed to offer genuine resistance, not theatrical compliance. The work was footwork and angle. In those 80 seconds, the assistant attempted to close distance 14 times. He succeeded in closing distance 0 times. The man in the white pullover moved in increments. He did not step backward, he stepped to angles. He moved to positions where the assistant's forward motion carried the assistant into exposure rather than advantage. He used distance the way a chess player uses the board, not as something to be defended, but as something to be configured. The tournament director, a man named Harold Ruiz, who had organized 11 major competitions in the previous 3 years, had both hands flat on the table in front of him. He was watching the footwork. He had been watching footwork in competition for a decade, and he had not seen footwork used precisely this way. He did not move for 40 seconds. He later said that he had been afraid that if he moved he would miss something. The second champion, the one from Phoenix, leaned forward in his folding chair approximately 40 seconds into the first phase. He remained leaning forward until the phase ended. He was watching the angles. He understood what was being shown, and understanding it made it more remarkable, not less. Because he could see the decision that preceded each movement, the reading that made the movement possible, and he could not find the moment when the reading happened. The reading appeared to happen before the action that prompted it. That is, of course, impossible, and the second champion knew it was impossible. But what he saw was what he saw. The third champion, the one from Portland, the one who had made the comment, was quiet now. He had set both his forearms on the table and he was looking at the demonstration floor with an expression that was not comfortable. The first phase ended. There was no applause, because no one thought to applaud. That was noted afterward. A room of 412 practitioners of a discipline that values control, and not one of them thought to respond when the first phase ended, because they had not yet finished processing what they had seen. The organizer waited 8 seconds and then announced the second phase. If you want to find out what happened in the next 3 minutes, make sure you are subscribed and go ahead and drop a comment below telling us where you are watching from. This story is not finished. The second phase involved a resistant partner of the organizer's choosing. The man chosen was 24 years old, a full-contact competitor who had fought 16 professional bouts and won 12. He was 6 feet 2 inches and weighed 201 pounds on that morning. He had been told to be genuine. He intended to be. The phase lasted 112 seconds. In that time, the larger man attempted 3 combinations that represented, by the judgment of the man watching, the best technique he possessed. He was not holding back. He was not performing. He was attempting to land clean technique against a man who had agreed to absorb it, and he was unable to do so. The first combination came at second 4, a left jab followed by a right cross followed by a left hook at the body. The man in the white pullover moved off the line of the jab at second 4. The cross passed through empty space at second 5. At second 6, he was standing at an angle the larger man had not anticipated. At a distance the larger man could not immediately close, and the larger man's left hook arrived 3 inches from its target, and pulled the larger man forward and off his base. The first champion from San Diego made a sound that was not a word. The second combination came at second 22. A right head kick of the kind that had ended 3 of the larger man's professional bouts. He committed to it. He was right to commit to it. A half-committed kick is worse than no kick. He threw it with full intent, and the man in the white pullover slipped it by a margin that 2 of the witnesses later described, independently, as 1 inch. Not by stepping back, not by blocking. By reading the angle of the hip rotation and moving his head 4 inches to the outside in the time between the hip and the foot. The tournament director Harold Ruiz had stopped breathing, which he later described as involuntary and brief. The third combination came at second 41. The larger man had adjusted. He threw a low kick to the lead leg first, to change the weight distribution, and then brought the right hand over the top. It was a sophisticated adjustment. It was the kind of adjustment that required real combat intelligence. He had thought, and what he had thought was correct, and it made no difference at all. The man in the white pullover checked the low kick with his shin at second 41, absorbed it without shifting his base. And at second 42 he was inside the right hand with his left forearm across the larger man's bicep, and his right hand placed, open, against the larger man's jaw with a pressure that was not force, but was the clear evidence of what force would mean. He held that position for 1 second. He stepped back. He looked at the larger man without expression. The larger man stepped back as well and stood with his hands at his sides and breathed through his nose and looked at the floor for a moment, and then looked up. The room was the kind of quiet that is not the absence of sound, but the presence of attention. 412 people allocating every sensory resource they possessed to a single square of polished hardwood. The third phase began because the organizer had said there would be a third phase, and men of that kind do not revise the agenda without a reason that exceeds the awkwardness of keeping it. He said, Again, that participation was not required. The third champion from Portland stood up. He was the one who had made the comment. He was the one who had said, in a voice the first 3 rows could hear, that if this was the best they could find, they would be there a very short time. He was 31 years old, and he held black belts in 3 disciplines, and he had spent 17 years developing a system of footwork that was being studied across 3 states. He was not a prideful man in the ordinary sense, but he was a precise man, and precision in a man who has spent 17 years achieving something can resemble pride from the outside and sometimes from the inside too. He walked to the edge of the demonstration floor. He removed his jacket. He folded it once and placed it on his chair. He was barefoot already. He stood at the edge of the floor and looked at the man in the white pullover, who had watched him walk over, and was now watching him stand at the edge and was doing nothing else. The man in the white pullover had the quality of complete stillness, not the stillness of waiting, but the stillness of someone who is entirely present in a place and has no need to demonstrate it. The third champion stepped onto the floor. He did not rush. He was a man who understood the value of not rushing. He moved to his preferred opening distance, the distance from which his footwork system operated most effectively, the distance he had spent 17 years learning to control, and he settled there and looked at the man in the white pullover and was ready. What he encountered was the particular experience of arriving at a distance and discovering that someone else had already decided what that distance meant. He feinted with the right shoulder at second 1. The feint was genuine, designed to produce a readable response. It produced no response. Not a shift of weight, not a blink, not a reorganization of the hands. Nothing. He feinted again at second 3, a drop of the left shoulder this time, lower and more committed. Nothing. At second 6 he moved forward and threw a right hand lead, his best technique from his best distance, thrown with full commitment, because he was a man who had learned that full commitment at the right moment is not recklessness, it is precision. The man in the white pullover was not at the distance the third champion had measured when the hand arrived. He was 8 inches closer, not 8 inches further away. 8 inches closer. Inside the technique. At the distance where the technique had no power, and the man throwing it had no leverage, and no base and no answer. The third champion felt a hand close on his right wrist, not grip it, close on it, with a controlled pressure, the difference between catching something and trapping it. He felt his own forward momentum used against his base in a way that he recognized from the theory of the discipline he had spent 17 years studying, a theory he had taught to others, a theory he understood completely, and which he was now experiencing as a student experiences it. From the inside, without warning or preparation, he went to one knee. The hand on his wrist remained. The man in the white pullover stood above him, and the hand remained, and there was something else. A right hand stopped in the space beside the third champion's jaw, open, 2 fingers extended, held there. Not a strike. The indication of where a strike would have been. The indication held for 2 seconds. Then it withdrew. The third champion was on one knee on the demonstration floor, and the hand on his wrist released, and the man in the white pullover stepped back, and extended the same right hand, palm up, open, and offered. The third champion looked at the hand. He looked at it for a moment that the man in the room would describe differently afterward. Some said it lasted 1 second. Some said 3. One man near the back said it felt like much longer than that, which was not an objective measurement but was not wrong either. He took the hand. He was helped to his feet. The man in the white pullover leaned forward and said something close to the third champion's ear. 4 words, according to the third champion himself. Speaking 37 years later in an interview published in a practitioner's journal in 2011, he said the words were not an apology, and were not a rebuke, and were not the kind of words he had expected from anyone who had just put him on one knee in front of 400 people. He said he spent the drive home repeating them to himself. He said he repeated them for years. He did not repeat them in the interview. He said some things were private. He said one more thing. He said that when he got to his car he sat in it for 11 minutes before he started it. The hand released. The man in the white pullover stepped back and looked at the third champion with the same expression he had worn throughout, which was not satisfaction and not indifference, and not something that fit neatly into any category the witnesses could settle on afterward. Harold Ruiz, the tournament director with both hands flat on the table, said later that the expression reminded him of a teacher watching a student complete something difficult, not pride in the student, not pride in himself, something older and quieter than either. The man in the white pullover walked to the folding chair at the edge of the floor. He put on his leather shoes, he picked up his jacket and put it on. He did not address the room. The organizer began to say something, and then stopped, which was the right decision. The man walked toward the side door through which he had entered. He passed within 4 feet of the first champion from San Diego. The first champion reached out and put a hand briefly on his shoulder as he passed. A light contact, the kind a man makes when he needs to confirm the physical reality of something he is not certain he has correctly seen. The man in the white pullover did not stop, but he did acknowledge the contact with a single nod, brief, unhurried, without turning his head. He walked out through the side door. The room remained quiet for a period that Harold Ruiz later estimated at 15 seconds, though he admitted his time perception in those minutes was unreliable. Then someone in the back row began talking, a low voice, and someone else responded, and by the time 30 seconds had passed, the gymnasium was filled with a noise that was not quite applause, and not quite conversation, but something between the two. The sound of 400 people attempting simultaneously to say what they had seen and discovering that the vocabulary was not immediately available. The third champion stood at the edge of the demonstration floor. The second champion from Phoenix had walked to him and they were talking quietly. The first champion from San Diego joined them a minute later. The three men talked for some time. They did not talk about what had gone wrong. They talked about what they had seen, the specific quality of the reading, the particular use of distance, the decision-making that appeared to precede the information that should have prompted it. They had spent a combined 61 years studying a discipline that was supposed to have given them the tools to understand what they had witnessed. They found the tools insufficient. The third champion went back to Portland the following morning. He revised his footwork curriculum within the month. He did not announce that he had revised it or explain why. 3 of his senior students noticed the change and asked him about it. He told them he had seen something worth incorporating. He did not say where or from whom. The second champion from Phoenix spent the next 4 months training differently. He reduced the distance at which he initiated his combinations, and increased the time he spent on what he called the reading drill, watching a partner move without responding, only reading. He brought his knockout rate in competition down by attempting fewer techniques and landing more of them. The first champion from San Diego wrote about the afternoon in a training journal he kept from 1969 through 1983. The journal was not published. His daughter found it in 2009 and read the entry. It was 2 pages. The last line of the entry read, "I have been looking at this wrong for a long time." He did not specify what this referred to, but his daughter, who had grown up watching him compete and had studied the discipline herself, said she understood exactly what he meant. Harold Ruiz organized 18 more major events over the following 6 years. He was asked in a 1979 interview about the most significant demonstration he had witnessed in his career as an organizer. He said March of 1974, without hesitating. The interviewer asked what made it significant. Ruiz said it was the silence. He said a room of 400 experts in physical technique watching in total silence was not something that happened often. He said it might happen once in a generation if the conditions were precisely right. He said the conditions that day were precisely right and the man at the center of them was precisely himself. The story moved through the Los Angeles circuit in the weeks that followed. Stories of this kind always move, and they always change as they move, acquiring details that were not present and losing details that were. By the summer of 1974, there were versions of the story that had the man in the white pullover arriving barefoot, or arriving in a suit, or arriving with a student who said nothing and stood by the wall. There were versions that had 4 champions instead of 3, and versions that had the third champion ending up on his back, rather than one knee, and versions where the man had announced himself at the door and the entire room had gone quiet immediately. None of those versions were accurate. The accurate version is quieter and therefore more remarkable, because remarkable things are quiet. That is the nature of them. What the accurate version tells you is something that is not about karate, and is not about championship records, and is not about what a man can do with his hands when pressed. It tells you something about the relationship between certainty and the thing that certainty prevents you from seeing. The three champions laughed at 14 minutes past 2 because they were certain. They had built their certainty honestly, over years of real work and genuine achievement. Their certainty was earned. And it was still the thing that failed them, because certainty about what you are looking at stops you from looking at what is actually there. The man in the green jacket against the far wall was not what they were certain they were looking at. He was something else. They found out what when he folded his jacket and set his shoes beside it, and walked onto the floor. By that point the certainty had become a debt they had to pay. A man's record tells you what he has done. It does not tell you what he is. Those are separate documents, and the second one is longer. Next week we will tell the story of the afternoon in 1979, when a film set in Burbank went quiet, because a stunt coordinator said 6 words that were not the right 6 words to say, and the man he said them to, who was sitting in a canvas chair reading a paperback, stood up and showed him why. That story has never been fully told, and we will tell it here.